So I've been thinking about what a nation is. I mean, in some sense, it brings to mind loyalty to place, to a certain topography, to natural communities of plants, animals, humans, to stacked up history, to a way of living that's shaped by the environment, inevitably. But it also brings to mind tyranny and social injustice from these days, specifically from our carbon sins that pool around the world, and invasions and abuses perpetrated by others, whether they're colonists or warriors, propelled by greed. And in the meantime, we're so divorced from the natural world in general that we don't have the vaguest idea how to fend for ourselves. As my husband says, we may not live to regret what we've done to the world. I'm not going to go deeply into what we've done to the world because I think we're all aware of what's happening. Our malfeasance with regard to nature has come back to us on the eve of extinction. If everything happens as climate models say it will happen, we'll start losing our resources, most importantly of water. But we live in a complexity of culture, of technological complexity and social globalized complexity that the complexity is actually a frailty. And so if one string is pulled out, the whole thing starts to collapse, as we can see this week that, people are having trouble finding gasoline or petrol to come to East Anglia. And so I think what's going to happen to us inevitably is that we'll be thrown back on nature, on our survival techniques, just to find water, to find food, to find a place to live, to deal with climate refugees who will be moving across boundaries, arbitrary boundaries, not ecological boundaries. And so it's a kind of ultimate irony. I think if we talk about nations, we have to talk about social justice and about governance, rules to live by, and the dehumanizing urgencies of capitalism, which is an addiction that's embraced us all, and we've embraced it, a denial of what is urgent and essential. I've traveled extensively in the Arctic since 1991. In the last few years, sort of urgently and often, all around the top of the world. And I've traveled by dog sled for the last 13 years with subsistence Inuit hunters in northwestern Greenland. So I actually had the sorrowful experience of feeling climate change under the soles of my sealskin hammocks. I felt the ice go away, basically. When I first started going to the Arctic, it was the seasonal sea ice on which they travel and hunt, and on which polar bears and walrus and ringed seals are completely dependent. It was once 13 to 14 feet thick in the winter and spring, and it's now 7 inches to 4 inches thick. And it's broken up not by melting, because it can be 59 below zero, but by the storm waves underneath breaks up the ice. And so in my last trip to Greenland in February, when it was, 40 below zero Fahrenheit, the ice was breaking up everywhere. We couldn't even go out on dog sleds. It wasn't stable enough for anything. That was February. February and March are the 2 coldest months of the year in the Arctic. So, and I've stood on the edge of the coast with people who go out on the ice daily to get food for their families and their dogs, and stood with them as tears rolled down their face when they realize that they'll be going hungry, and they began shooting their dogs because they had no way to feed them. So I've spent a lot of time looking at indigenous Arctic people and how they've lived. They've lived in a kind of circular sequence of boundaries and passages. The boundaries are social rules shaped by the need for food and the ways in which the harshest environment in the world has compelled them to get that food, to be absolute geniuses on the ice. Forms of intelligence that we haven't even imagined, we who live in the techno world, that comes early in life, that 7-year-olds are capable of making a kayak, paddling it, throwing a harpoon, getting food, butchering the animal, or skinning the little auk and feeding extended families and the dogs who transport them on the ice. The passages were traditionally created by rituals that were rituals of gratitude and a prayer for the animals to return to them, but with the understanding that they had to be treated with respect or they would go away. The Apaches, Indians in North America, say that stories about the land hold in them rules about how to live. Yupik women in southeastern Alaska say that they sweep the way clean for the animals to come to them at the beginning of bowhead whale hunting. And they literally make a broom, sometimes out of raven feathers and sometimes out of walrus whiskers, and sweep the snow away from where they'll store the meat. They make new clothes at the beginning of each hunting season, completely new clothes, from the skins of the animals they got the previous year. In the masked dances that they held, rituals to express gratitude, they made new masks, and at the end of the dance, they destroyed them. So, in a way, it was a kind of ode to impermanence. Nobody in the world understands death and living the way the Inuit people do.